Hello, everyone. This is Cindy Rubin. I am owner and founder of In Touch Pediatrics and Lactation, a home visit practice outside of Chicago. And for this week's episode of Keeping in Touch, I have with me Dr. Rashmi Schramm, who is an amazing doctor. She was born in India and moved to the US when she was about 12 years old and grew up in and went to college and medical school in Virginia, and then moved down to Florida, Jacksonville, which is where she is now, to do her family medicine residency, and has been practicing medicine there since. She became somewhat disillusioned by the traditional insurance system of medicine, which is probably a theme you will hear frequently on this show, after 16 years of practice, and started to study meditation, yoga, Ayurveda lifestyle, and became a certified teacher via the prestigious Chopra Global Program. And after seeing firsthand how those methods helped her personal well-being and the well-being of those close to her, she decided to leave the insurance system, and she opened her unique practice, Optimal Wellness. And there she uses her skills as a certified health coach, meditation and yoga teacher, and Ayurvedic lifestyle teacher to help busy, high-achieving professionals ditch the guilt and tap into their inner peace and power so they can live life with more energy, fulfillment, and joy. Packed a lot in there. Welcome, Dr. Schramm.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Dr. Rubin. It is my pleasure to be here. What a lovely introduction.
I'm so happy to have you here. And I mean, there's a lot to say. You're doing a lot of things and helping people in so many different ways, and just have a really interesting story of how you got here too. So I'm looking forward to chatting and hearing your story and how you can help my followers as well. So let's start. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story? What really are the things that you were kind of going through and your thought process as you made a transition from the traditional system to what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. All of these things, whether it was meditation, Ayurveda, yoga therapy, yoga, all of those things, I initially was just trying to help myself, because I found myself, as I had young kids and was working a lot, my husband was working a lot, and just the stressors that I was never really, I shouldn't say was never taught, but I never really understood that there were more tools that we could be using, and that we had certain limitations with how much stressors we can withstand and how well we can do it if we're not actually understanding how to discharge some of that stress. So as I became an attending, and as I had young kids and all the things that come along with being a parent, I was experiencing just a lot of turbulence in my health. I was experiencing a lot of turbulence mentally. I really had a very kind of an anxious mind, an overactive mind, if you will, if anybody can relate to that.
Yeah.
Right. And emotional well-being. I didn't even know that emotions were a thing. I literally, during our training, we were told emotions don't exist. And that's nothing farther from the truth. Right. So as I was practicing medicine, I was also seeing this mirrored back to me as well. I mean, it just so happens that people kind of become drawn to us when we start to practice in a certain way. So like in family medicine, I had a lot of amazing young women who were my patients. And it wasn't just young women, it was women of all ages who were also suffering from a lot of anxiety. And we really don't have very many good tools. We have some medicines we can use. I'll never say anything bad about medicines, but they are just very limiting.
Yeah.
They have all kinds of reasons why maybe that's not where we stop. And so the short story to that is, when I first signed up for my first meditation teacher class, and this was over a decade ago, it really wasn't because I ever thought I was going to teach. I needed the in-depth learning. I wanted the community, and I needed the accountability. I had dabbled in meditation here and there before, and it had worked for me, whether I was suffering from daily migraines or just insomnia or GI distress, all of the things. I just couldn't figure out how to stay accountable for it. And so when I did that, I mean, that was before any of these apps, that was before social media. I didn't know anyone else near me. And way back then, I was almost like embarrassed to say that I was a meditator. I talk about how I was a closet meditator because it meant that there must be something wrong with me if I can't handle all the stress that's going on. So that's really how I started to get into some of these things. And as I learned more, you know how it goes, right? Once that door opens, you just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's so much and there's so much depth to
Right.
it. And I'm still enrolled in 3 other programs that are more advanced because that never ends.
Wow.
And as we start to dive into that, I was literally just gathering like my staff, my office staff, like before a clinic or even at lunchtime or something. And we would just do like simple breathwork exercises or meditation. And then word just kind of started to spread. And so then I would teach at the local Y. And so it was really like that for a long, long time where I was able to just give little tiny snippets. And at some point, though, it's just really not enough when metrics come into play, which I'm sure were a big deal for you guys too, but I couldn't fit into that tiny little hole anymore. And that's really when I decided to try things on my own. And that was in 2019. It was actually the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020, I should say that. So the practice itself has also totally evolved. And really right now I run group programs and I also do one-on-one coaching as well. And I also run in-person retreats. And all of those are really concentrated on helping mostly women who are very much so where I was in that place of feeling stuck, feeling like I've lost myself in some way, which certainly motherhood can do that to us in different
Yes,
ways.
absolutely.
You know, recognizing the beauty and the potential that's already right here and right now, and being able to use this ancient wisdom in a very, very practical way. So nothing really esoteric, very practical, and completely merged with neuroscience. Because, you know, science is, we're just now catching up. These yogis, they've been practicing and evolving these practices for 3, 4, 5,000 years. And, you know, we're in year 22 of studying this stuff. So it's going to take us a while to catch up to some of it. But some of the results, some of the studies that have already been published are pretty astounding. And that's really what I focus on.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's beautiful. Just such a lovely story. And we're so lucky to have someone like you to be able to help us, you know, crazy type A high achiever get through, because it is hard. And then you add the parenthood thing on top of it. It's really rough. And just to clarify for some people who may not understand what Dr. Schramm meant when she said you add into the metrics in this insurance system that we work in or worked in, there's a lot of things that the insurance companies make you check off. And they decide what are the most important things that you as a practice or as a physician need to be working on over a period of time. And they will ding you if you didn't reach some standard that they have set for something, whether it be diabetes control or high blood pressure or whatever. And you have to click a lot of boxes and do a lot of things that are not necessarily what your patient needs, who's right in front of you, and sometimes are exactly the opposite of what they need. I mean, we really struggled in my office with having to have a BMI for every patient. And some patients have eating disorders, and there's reasons why you may not want to bring this up, but yet you don't get an allowance for those people, and how much we might be leading to things like that by focusing so much on those numbers. So it can become frustrating, not to mention the fact that when you have to do all those things, you don't have time to do the other things.
Yeah, and it takes away from the personalization of medicine, what it really is, which is unfortunate for our patients in the most, even more so than us, if we're forced to become robotic in how we practice medicine, when there's nothing robotic about medicine whatsoever. It is a beautiful art and an opportunity with every interaction.
Yeah. Well, just sounds amazing what you're doing. And I'm sure that you are seeing people, just like we're just saying, that everybody's different. And I imagine there are very different kinds of people who find their way to you. And I'm curious, what are the more common kinds of stories that you hear, and what have you been able to get people through?
Yeah, and I've really been so grateful I've really just grown completely organically. So it's just mostly been word of mouth, people who worked with me before who refer me to someone else, or people who were in my group who, talked about it with someone and then they came in because they were curious. And so really, I just ask that anyone that comes in to do any kind of this work is just open and curious. That's really the only two things that we need. There's no belief system involved. There's no need to believe in any one certain thing, just so long as there's some open mindedness. But for the most part, I would say it is not uncommon for someone to just feel like they're really stuck, right? Because life is really hard. It's complicated. No matter which place in life we are, it is very complicated. It is nuanced and it has many layers of these complexities. And we might have had a lot of setbacks or disappointments by way of either relationships or jobs or all of the above, right? And when they come at super fast speed, and keep in mind that despite the setbacks and the disappointments, literally every human alive right now, even before the pandemic, was really dealing with a kind of a chronic daily stress, right? And that accumulates as well. Daily stress is an epidemic, and it was even before the pandemic. And then you add the stressors of the pandemic, and then you add the stressors of trying to figure out how to normalize after a worldwide pandemic. So there's again these many, many layers of life and complexities. And so there is some feeling of stuckness. There is some feeling of I don't even know how to relax anymore. There's some feeling of I am constantly on the go and it doesn't feel okay. So that's really what we work with. And ultimately, there is a very holistic view on all of this, which is kind of what yoga and Ayurveda have been saying for thousands of years, is that we don't have to create anything. It's kind of your most perfect, your highest potential is already there. It's just how do we uncover it? That's really that work that's involved. It's like the layers are like layers of an onion. They've been piling up for a long, long time. And so all these different practices, we just very gently start to peel back layer after layer after layer until we actually leave what's revealed, which is that beautiful infinite potential of who we actually are, until we actually can see it. It's a felt sense. It's not like a logical thing. So we have to kind of go past the mind, if you will. That's a lot of the work that we do, which is just moving past the monkey mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's intense.
Intensely easeful is
Yeah,
really,
sure. For
yeah.
sure. Well, I work in particular with a lot of women who are postpartum and hoping or have some vision of what they want their breastfeeding journey and their motherhood journey to be like. And a lot of the time, for a million different reasons, it doesn't look the way they expected it to, and are kind of in that place where they may be stressed out, confused, worried, certainly not taking out any time for themselves. And in a situation where, like, legitimately, it's very, very hard to do that. When you have a newborn baby who is 100% dependent on you and needs to eat every 3 hours, and you're trying to breastfeed, which means it has to be you who has to feed them every 3 hours. I mean, this is a really, really difficult thing for anybody to deal with, even going into it with the best of physical and mental health. So I'm curious what kinds of tips and tricks you might have for these women who are struggling. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to solve everything in one little half-hour session, but what are things that I can use in my own practice to help them, and things that they can do directly from your recommendations, and where they can get help if this is the kind of help that they're looking for?
Yeah, this is such a great question, Dr. Rubin, because my oldest just turned 18 and she's heading off to college. And I distinctly remember that period of time. It was
Yeah.
one of the hardest times in my life. Like, I had no idea what was going to happen. Like, oh my gosh, the breastfeeding and the pain, and then the stress, and then the lack of sleep, and then the hormonal changes, and
Mhm.
all just a complete upheaval of all the things. And so it's so
Yes.
impractical to sit here and go, well, why don't you just take time for yourself? And why don't you sleep 8 hours a day? It's not going to happen.
Right.
Right. And I literally remember like it was yesterday, like my mom was working a lot, but she was able to take 5 days off. My husband back then, I mean, this was 18 years ago, no one had paternity leave. I hadn't even heard
Yeah.
of that term. And mine was only just a few weeks. And so he really literally only, I think, took half a day off or something. And he was off of work. And then my mom left on day 5. And I literally remember like tears streaming down my face. Like, what am I going to do? Like,
Right?
I know I wished for this, but this seems like my worst nightmare. Literally remember the visceral, the deep depression that set in. She was pulling out of the driveway. And I was like, oh my God. So I hear you. I feel you. This is painful. It's a really hard time. So one of the first things to acknowledge is just what you just did, which is to acknowledge this feels hard because it is hard.
Mhm.
And just giving ourselves permission for this to be hard because I don't know why, but I just didn't know that it was hard. I didn't know it
Yeah,
was supposed to be
I
hard.
know. How is it that
I
we don't know
literally
that?
didn't. I was just like, "Oh, as soon as this baby comes out, it's gonna be great, she's gonna be amazing." And she screamed for 5 months, and a
Yeah.
lot of that was because I was very anxious, I can tell that now, but I
Mhm.
was incredibly anxious as a new mom. It was a little bit better the second time around, but then I had like a 20-month-old carrying around. So it is genuinely one of the most challenging times in our lives, and so just giving ourselves permission to feel that this is really hard, I think is a really powerful recognition for ourselves because that's just
Mm.
an awareness of this is really hard. And one of the things that we practice a lot is just hands over the heart because that is a
Mm.
mammalian reflex as well, right? Of just acknowledging this is really hard. I'm here for you. Just this, I've got your back. Like, we've got this. This is really, really hard. And
Yeah.
let's see what we can do, right? Just the acknowledgement of just presencing ourselves is really, really important. And, when we are in these very stressful times, and the postpartum period is a very stressful time for 1 million reasons, what can happen, and rightfully so, is that we can stay in that sympathetic go, 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 fight or
Mhm.
flight response, right? And while it is helpful to keep us alive, it is not helpful on a long term basis. And so, one of
Right.
the things that can help us to bring even the slightest modicum of balance, because listen, there's no balancing anything during that postpartum period. So that's like not the right word, but even a modicum, like if you think of it as a seesaw, the parasympathetic rest and restore and the sympathetic kind of that fight or flight, if you can think of it as a seesaw as a simplistic way of looking at it, then even if we can move it just a tiny, tiny bit over into the parasympathetic area, just
Yeah.
so there can be a little bit of healing, a little bit of homeostasis, which is that dynamic non-change in the midst of constant change. If we can move the needle just the tiniest bit, then we can start to have a little bit more openness, a little bit more expansiveness, and we can practice more of that self-compassion. We can practice a little bit more of, can I nap? I know people say I should nap, but can I nap when this baby is napping? Like, I remember hearing that all the time, but I never, ever napped when the baby napped because I just felt like there was so much to do. And so, even just giving ourselves the tiniest bit of space is really, really helpful. And there are certain things that we can do to move ourselves physiologically. This is not just a mind game. We can't just think our way out of this. That's not how this
Right.
works. If you've ever seen someone, you can't just be like, no, snap out of it. That's not how this works. And really, though, what we can do is we can use what we understand from neuroscience and from ancient wisdom, which is the tone of this vagal nerve, that 10th cranial nerve, is bidirectional. And so that means that, yes, the brain is telling the body what to do, but it's also collecting data and coming back and telling the brain what's up, right? As in the West, we rely so much on a top down approach, but really what we do when I incorporate these things is really a bottom up approach in a way. And so we're actually utilizing that vagal nerve, that vagal tone. And we have so many studies now that show that when we move into that parasympathetic kind of response, the vagal tone goes up and vice versa. And in fact, when you increase your vagal tone, that's when you move into the parasympathetic nervous response. And so we do different breath work, right? So one of the simplest ways is somebody has been in yoga classes. Ujjayi breath is something where it's like victorious breath is another way to think of that, where we're actually reverberating and using where the vagal nerve comes in. It's innervated through the neck, or just even, things like humming can be really helpful because we're increasing the vagal tone then. We're learning just a couple of breath work exercises. So in many, many ways, using the vagal nerve, the most important healing nerve in our body, to tell the brain that everything's okay.
Wow. I'm just thinking about the things that autistic kids do or kids with sensory issues do to self-soothe, and it's
It's
what you're
this.
describing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
just know inherently that this is what they need to do.
Right, right. I teach meditation, but I don't think I would have ever had a 4-minute meditation when I was postpartum. I don't think so. But just a mindful way of being can be really helpful to bring us into that healing response as well. So, mindfulness, it's kind of a hashtag word, but there's an agreed upon kind of definition, and it's the awareness that arises when we are paying attention to this present moment without judgment and with curiosity.
Hmm, I like that.
Right? And it's actually inherent in our nature because if you look at how do 2, 3, and 4-year-olds behave? No one taught them how to be mindful. They are present, they are aware, they are not judging, and they are curious.
Right,
And we forget that that's our inherent nature, and that's why it feels so good.
right, right. Yeah, and I have struggled with in my type A-ness, feeling like I can't meditate because I can't push all those thoughts out. And I have learned over time, like, you don't need to.
That's exactly
No,
right.
it's not
Yeah.
all or nothing.
Yeah.
And the way it is with so many different things that we get into this kind of perfectionist mindset.
For sure, for sure,
Yeah,
and I used to have those same thoughts too. It isn't that we are ever trying to control the mind. If we're trying to control the mind or control our thoughts, that connotes some kind of struggle, some kind of like winning and losing, but
right,
really it's more of a how do we just redirect? How do we really at this point be able to train the mind? It's more of a training the mind rather than a controlling the mind. And the more we can just allow ourselves permission to see if that can happen, the easier it gets, just like
yeah,
with everything else.
right. You need to practice.
And then we need to give ourselves permission
Right.
because, what is meditation? It is the fastest way to build our mindfulness muscle. And what is mindfulness? It's non judgment and curiosity. And so if we're sitting here judging our meditation practice, we're not actually being very mindful. But there's a reason for all of this, right? Like we've been conditioned. It isn't like, oh, I can't ever get over my condition. No, but it's the awareness that helps us say, oh, yeah, these are borrowed thoughts. I have 60 to 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And these have had a lot of airtime in my brain that everything that I do has to be done in this certain way. It has to be
Right.
perfect, or I don't need to do it, or whatever it is that we tell ourselves a lot. And it is helpful though. It's helpful in certain situations. We can't make mistakes as doctors. So it's helpful. And that's where it gets murky. Where do we give ourselves permission?
Right. Like, I've struggled. I know that social media, it's the best of things and the worst of things all put together. I mean, every time that I think, okay, I need to get off of social media for my own mental health, I think, but this is how I learn too. And this is where my community is. And it's really, really hard.
It is so hard. And keep in mind that the way that social media is designed by AI is to keep you on
Yeah.
social media, right? And one of the things too, and I struggle too, it's not like I figured out the answer, except I set timers for myself
Right.
because it'll be a thought game. But really, ultimately, the question becomes, how do I use social media and not let it use me? And that's the $1,000,000 question. And it is hard because there's no beginning, middle, or end, like a conversation or a book chapter
Right.
or a magazine.
Right.
It doesn't have an end. And it's designed to keep our brains just kind of being in that zone. So the struggle is real and
Yeah.
it's all of us.
Yeah. And just bringing it into kind of the motherhood breastfeeding kind of situation. I mean, I know that people who are in breastfeeding groups who struggle with production, then they see people post a picture about how they've got too much milk. And, I mean, just everything. It doesn't matter what you say, but it could trigger something for someone, and you never know when it's going to come. And you're never going to find a community or a place where everybody thinks exactly the same, or everybody does things the way, or everybody has the same outcomes. And I think that's getting back to what you said, which is giving yourself permission to know that your problem might not be the same problem that somebody else has, or it might not be a problem for them, but it is a problem for you. And that's okay. And it's okay to work through that, even if it's just your own. And I mean, the compare-itis that we keep using that term. It's huge.
It is huge and it can pop up all over the place and it can cause us so much trouble in our lives in every stage of our lives. And remembering that most of us aren't taking selfies when we're feeling really bad or when terrible things are happening. We're usually pretty quiet about it. And so not letting some of those photos fool us, whether
Right.
it's about parenting or being in a partnership. I mean, marriage partnership, that's really hard. Being a parent is really hard. Working is really hard. Being a working parent is really hard. Like all of
Right.
those things. And a lot of the times we're not really having some of those conversations. And hopefully we have enough trusted confidants where we can have those conversations, but knowing that that's not really reality.
Right. I'm a doctor, but yeah, a pediatrician who used to round in the hospital, and I would be in mom's rooms after during their postpartum first couple of days every single day. I had no idea what was really going on with them. You
Right.
don't hear about that Perry bottle until you need it.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what that is, like it's a bottle that you fill with water and you use as a spray to wipe yourself, whether it's pee or poop or whatever, after you have a baby, because that area has been traumatized, it's very sore. And the last thing you want to do is take a piece of toilet paper and wipe. You have no idea that that is going on until you experience it yourself. And I don't know why we don't talk about that more. Because
Yeah.
just being able to go into it with realistic expectations can make such a big difference.
For sure, and that's where I am so grateful that for the work that you're doing, right? Like, no one talked about 4th trimester. I'd never even heard of that term when I
Yeah.
had my baby. It was, like, felt very alone, and I think that's one of the scariest things about just our society is that we are so self-sufficient in so many ways, because
Yeah.
even just a generation ago, we would not be separated from our tribe, if you will,
Right.
and where we could get wisdom from elders, where we could commiserate, where we would have cousins or siblings or all peers who can say, yeah, this happened to me too. But I think it's that one of the worst things that can happen is just feeling alone in a struggle. And that's why I think the work that you do is incredible, because they're not alone. They're working with you.
Right.
And that would have been amazing if I had found you back then, which of course you wouldn't have been. So
Yeah, no, we're one of the few countries that doesn't provide automatic supports postpartum, which is really sad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That is also a big area of lack, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. So, can you give me, because I know we don't have a ton of time here, just another kind of tip for that vagal tone, just something somebody can do in the moment when they feel things just piling up. I know I feel it every day with my kids and just trying. It's so much easier to say, keep a calm demeanor. It's a lot easier said than done.
Oh, for
And
sure, for
uh,
sure, and I think also just appearing calm is not but then there's like a
right,
chaotic whatever happening under the hood. That's not really what we're looking for. We don't
right,
really want a show of calmness and then freak
right.
out. I mean, on the inside, we really want it to be from the inside out. So one of the things to consider too, and I always like to keep things very, very simple, is our breath is our connection. It connects the mind to the body and vice versa. And we just talked about something called Ujjayi breath. But one of the things we can think of is there's heart rate variability, but in general, the sympathetic nervous system is in charge of the inhalation and the parasympathetic is in charge of the exhalation. And
Mm.
so anytime we're practicing breath work, one simple thing you can do is just count your breath. And so inhale for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for a count of 6. So anytime we're exhaling longer than the inhalation, we are activating the parasympathetic nervous response. And so more advanced practitioners can go much longer. It can be like a 4-4-12 with practice. But anytime we can practice that, what happens each time we practice it is literally we build neural pathways for it. And so one of the more common mistakes people will make is they'll wait until they feel anxious to practice one of these
Mm.
things. It's understandable because we think of it as just a fix. But really, what we do when I'm working with my women is we practice it every day for 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes in the evening until the mind and the body are used to it being, oh, now everything is fine. And so
Yeah.
that way, when we do get into one of those, which happens every day for me and for everybody that I work with, there's going to be triggers, there's going to be stressors that come at us, there's going to be disappointments, there's going to be situations that come. And when that happens, it doesn't mean that we avoid them, but we actually can continue to activate the prefrontal cortex when we stay in at least a semi-calm internal space. We actually have more access to our intellect when we can do that. Whereas if we're really in a very major kind of freak out mode, which certainly I can get into pretty fast actually, then the amygdala is sounding the alarm, that midbrain is sort of like everybody, oh my gosh, we got to survive. The prefrontal cortex, which is this area that helps us make these creative decisions, which helps us come up with creative solutions in stressful situations, just goes offline, which is why, like, when we think of when we were really stressed, we make some pretty terrible decisions. We're like, why did I do that? It's because we really couldn't access that part of our brain. And so if we can manage to keep a modicum as much as possible of some amount of this stability, some amount of groundedness, it really is just a huge advantage for not just us, but everybody around us, because then we can stay in that stable kind of space. And so that's really what we're working. I do 10, 12-week programs. I do entry level programs. I do deeper level. I do memberships, and I do one-on-ones. And so there's a beautiful world of this to explore where we're really constantly upgrading the mind and the body. There's no upper limit, it turns out. So to answer your question, the simplest way is to exhale longer than you inhale.
Okay. All right. Well, I've learned a lot. So take home points that I've learned. Allow yourself to acknowledge that you're having a hard time, and it's okay to have a hard time. And then you move on to how can you better get through that hard time. It's okay to ask for help.
Oh my gosh. We have to, right? We can't survive without it.
You have to exhale longer than you inhale. Humming can strengthen the vagal nerve and that vagal response to help you calm down and be self-soothing. This is wonderful. I can't wait to use these things myself.
Well, yeah, and I meant to tell you this too. Sighing, deep sighing, also activates the vagal nerve.
I'm really good at sighing.
Yeah. See, it was an intrinsic thing. And so when we do that, we're actually literally activating the vagal nerve.
That's so fascinating to me because I have had patients, kids with anxiety, who do these deep sighs, and they come to see me as a pediatrician because their parent is worried that they're having a breathing problem. But they're actually probably self-treating their anxiety.
Right, with no side effects.
Right. I have come to be able to recognize it as anxiety, but I thought it was more of a symptom, not a treatment, which is really very cool. Wow. Well, I want to ask, if you have time, two fun questions. So one is, for people who are traveling in the Florida, Jacksonville area, what's your favorite thing in the area? What's your favorite thing personally to do, or do you recommend for tourists to do in your area?
Yeah, so I'm really close to St. Augustine, which is just a glorious outdoor mecca that has amazing restaurants, oceanfront restaurants, coastal front restaurants, a beautiful Spanish fort. And so I think don't miss St. Augustine and the beaches that are there. They're gorgeous.
Okay. I never even heard of it. I need to remember this. All right. And this is a big one, but if you had the chance to go back and talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Ooh, I like that. You know, I recently found my essay that I think I would have written when I was 21 to get into medical school, and it brought me to tears in how much I believed in myself. Literally, I just couldn't believe it. I would say it's all going to turn out okay. I think there's always a little bit of this like concern. What if this thing happens? What if that thing happens? And those things may happen. It's not that they don't happen, but it's going to turn out.
Right.
Yeah.
You just need to allow yourself
to have those lessons brought to you. And no one is ever done learning, ever.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I think this is going to be so helpful for so many people. And if somebody feels that they would like to explore more about what you do and get in touch with you, what is the best way for us to find you?
Yeah, so my website is optimalwellnessmd.org. I actually have free meditations you can download there. I'm also on YouTube. I have a free YouTube channel, and I have breathwork exercises there that are completely free. I have meditations that are evidence-based that are also completely free. So please check those out. Those are completely free resources you can access from the greater Chicago area or anywhere in the world.
Great. I will put those in the notes on the YouTube channel where I store these interviews. And if anybody who is watching this after the fact has questions for Dr. Schramm, you can put them in the comments and we will check those out and answer everything that we can.
Absolutely.
There are not answers for everything. I wish there were.
Yes.
But
Yes. And if I don't know the answer, I have teachers and mentors I can ask.
right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And I hope everybody has enjoyed today's episode on keeping in touch.
Thank you
See
so
you
much,
next
Dr.
week.
Rubin.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.